It's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Jason Zheng. He's a hydrogen innovation consultant at the Victorian Hydrogen Hub as part of Swinburne University, and he's leading the Hydrogen Readiness program, which is it intends to support the implementation of the Australian National Hydrogen Energy Strategy through university-wide engagement and collaboration. He specialises in bridging knowledge gaps between industry and the research innovation community and bringing them together for solution-driven practices. Jason's focus is on creating the demand side of the hydrogen through working with industry partners to realise the full potential of hydrogen. His talk's titled Hydrogen Readiness for Chemical Sensing Research, Development and Demonstrations, and I'll hand off to him.
Thank you very much, Chris, for the introduction, and I will get on to the slide and let me know if you can actually see it properly from your end. And yeah, that's good. I can see the note, yeah, which is great. And yeah, well, thanks again, Chris, for your introduction, and also thanks for this opportunity to actually share my work and experiences with you all here today. As Chris mentioned, I am currently working within Victorian Hydrogen Hub as the hydrogen innovation consultant, and to actually lead on the hydrogen kind of activities here within the Swinburne community. And well, before I go into details, I would like to share a bit of like maybe more background of myself to actually give you a bit of more, put everything into a context for this event. So I graduated from the University of Queensland with a PhD in environmental and chemical engineering, and that was in 2012. And after that, I've done a number of years research focusing on the renewable energy production from essential organic waste and also other sorts of alternative sources. And while I was doing this, I was actually also supporting our industry partners in terms of translating of our research outcomes into their actual business processes. And as part of that, I was actually doing a kind of consultancy work on part-time basis to essentially looking into the feasibilities and of implementing all those technologies in the business and the processes. And so through this journey, I have personally experienced and also gradually noticed that, at least to me, the thing that is becoming more important is actually for me to see the impact of my research or our kind of research activities as a community to give the impacts in the general public and also in our community, so they can have a better life or kind of a more productive life. And this is actually in kind of a contrast with publications and all other kind of so-called research outcomes. And the reason why I am actually stressing on this is because, like, in the next 40 minutes or so, I will be essentially showing you an example of, like, again, my journey and also reflection of my understandings of how you can better work with industry partners to do better research that will potentially generate impacts on top of outcomes. And through working you through the Hydrogen Readiness program that I'm leading, just using it as an example, and to really give you maybe a reflection on how I see as essentially as a research, early career researcher, and also as part of like a past of my life as RHD student, how I can potentially do a better job if I went back again, and to really generate more impacts from my research activities. So yes, of course, and without a capable and supportive team, I won't be able to achieve anything. And this is actually my core team. as a part of again Swinburne key initiatives, which is the Factor of the Future. And what the Factor of the Future, in short, FORF, is doing is to support and working closely with industry partners, mainly from manufacturing sector, through the implementation or adoption of the so-called Industry 4.0 technologies to support the businesses to be more competitive and to be more sustainable, and also to working together with them to work out some what we refer to as the innovative business models, and to de-risk it by kind of running them through our Industry 4.0 hubs, and also leveraging on those capabilities, for example, digital twins, where we essentially creating a virtual process or plant that incorporating all those innovative models before you actually build up a real one in the real world. And as a part of the support, we are also looking into from the energy efficiency and sustainable part as well. And that's where my expertise comes in to really help the businesses looking from energy or renewable or low carbon energy perspective in terms of how they can sustain and advance their technologies and also businesses. And as I mentioned, I'm actually in the meantime or part of the Victorian Hydrogen Hub, BH2. It's a whole ecosystem focusing on the hydrogen-specific tasks. So a quick introduction of BH2. It is actually a Victorian government initiative that is looking to support again our industries, and but also in the meantime to bring together the research sectors and the business sectors to help the Australian as a whole. But in this case, will be particularly in our Victorian context to transit into a sustainable and clean economy. In this case, it's again a hydrogen economy, and within it, we are collaborating closely with CSIRO, which is the leading scientific research agency here in Australia, and also Arena 2636, a German research agency based at Germany, in Germany. And within the WIC-H2 structure, we are focusing on essentially 4 aspects of a hydrogen economy that names, and also we kind of designed a 5 kind of leading program or key initiatives to cover each one of those. And that's namely the engagement program, where we are closely working with partners to try to actually support them to actually understand how they can better engage and work with research and other sectors. And the Hydrogen Readiness program, which is the program I'm leading, and the same one I'm going to show you in a few minutes time, to really focusing on bring in the industry partner to give them a introduction of the hydrogen, essentially trying to increase their literacy levels of hydrogen, and also to actually work closely to help them to get better and be prepared for the adoption of hydrogen. And then we also have the skill road program, which is looking at understanding the skill needs and also the gaps in terms of workforce capacities that will be needed by the future hydrogen economy. And social licensing part of the program, looking at the kind of the perspectives from the publics and the communities towards acceptance of hydrogen, and how we can better communicate to both ends of the spectrums. That's the general publics and also industries and also government agencies in terms of how we actually can bring the hydrogen on board as a whole. And last but not least is that engagement part of the program, where we are supporting the industry partners of us to actually address their skill shortages, and also to give our research, essentially RHD students, the opportunity to work closely with industry partners and to have better understanding of their businesses in the context of adopting hydrogen. So, yeah, well, very very quickly, again, the objectives, as I mentioned, the program is trying to increase basically 2 parts for external parties, but also there's a third one for our internal stakeholders, which is essentially to increase the literacy levels of toward hydrogen, and also get the business to be prepared and ready for the uptake of hydrogen. And for us, we are looking for, through the delivery of the program, to bring in additional collaborations with industry partners, but more importantly, to actually generate impact, well, research impact through those collaborations and through the means of translating our researchers into their business and processes. And this is how we are going to do it. Essentially, again, it will be a very tailored approach, depending on the businesses of, or the nature of the business and the sectors they're coming from. But I won't go into too much details. But essentially, it's actually a mapping of how we are going to lead the conversations between the research community and the industry community to come out for the common and closely aligned goals of doing future work on those identified questions. So now, yeah, this is like before I jump into the detail of the program, that is going to be happening in the next 10-15 minutes. And a bit of a context for the program. It's actually designed for kind of oriented to the industry, and with a kind of time span of 7 to 8 hours for the whole program. But due to the time limitation today, I will try to actually only highlight a few key points of the program, or parts of the program, so to give you an overview of the whole program in terms of how we design it, how we're going to deliver it, but more importantly, to actually give you again, as I mentioned, an example of how, as a researcher, we can construct the conversations with industry for us, together with industry partner, to come to a commonly identified research gaps or problems that they are sharing the same concern, but also we can potentially help them to address. So with that in mind, I'll start with the actual mid part of the program. So, and normally I would start with the big why. And here in this case will be the hydrogen. And why hydrogen? And for us to actually kind of start talking about hydrogen, we probably need to start talking about the climate change or the global warming issues that we have been increasingly facing or experiencing from maybe 20 or 30 years ago, and becoming more and more severe recently. And this is actually what has happened around us here in Victoria not so far ago. And as you can see, I cannot put it in the context of if there were no COVID, and this was probably the biggest news globally in 2020 because of its scale, its impact, and its kind of longevities of it in relation to the way it's impacted our life, community, and economic. And I kind of here put in a few key high-level figures that to give you a reflection what I mean by the big impact of this natural disaster. Because here, well, in this 9 months bushfire, there were 34 people killed and more than 1 trillion animals perished. And if you can recall, there was a social media photo that has gone viral where this guy was holding a burned koala in a photo. And that's kind of shocked me. I believe shocked a lot of other people as well. And that's actually a result of a natural disaster. And on top of that, 3,500 houses or homes got affected, and thousands of buildings got destroyed. And 46 million acres of land got impacted. And yeah, put that into context, and that is, well, for example, England, the land of England is about, if I can remember it's correctly, it's 130,000 square kilometers. And in this time, here in Australia, in Victoria, the bushfire has essentially burned the whole England. in a 9 months time, and affected more than 80% of Victorian population. And also like roughly about $2 billion of financial damage caused by the same event, and also 26 of the whole Australian business got impacted. And that's, I can assure that's just the beginning of it, and we're just seeing the start of it. And yeah, I think there will be more to come if we are not going to do anything about it. And sometimes, like people, well, I normally run into the argument. People think, well, that's just normal, and that's a cyclic, and you got hot years and you got colder years. But that's like every 3 or 4 years or 5 years, there will be a cycle. And I have actually gone back to the literature researches done by those top scientists. And what I have found here is actually a simple chart that is showing the global warming, which is actually those kind of dotted kind of fluctuation. That's a monthly average of the temperature in here, the atmospheric temperature. And this blue line you are seeing is actually the temperature it should be if there were no human kind of introduced activity or impacts. And the orange line is also the actual the carbon emission that is associated with human activities. As you can see here, the human activities has caused and also the carbon emissions caused by human activities has a very close correlation with increase of the temperature. And it's very clear to me that global warming is actually caused by the human activities. And I think a lot of people share in my same view and can agree on me. And because of that, out of the 180 plus countries globally, 137 countries, this is by the end of 2020, those countries have signed or pledged to reach to a net zero by a certain time of the year. And as you can see here, where I highlighted, this is where we are sitting, Australia, and next to Singapore, where we pledge to go to net zero by kind of between 2050 or to 2100, and which is kind of okay, we are pledging to do something, but not as impressive as we should be, given we have vast kind of natural resources that we can tap into, which I will cover in later. And other than that, I think I'll be trying to be positive about it. And this is kind of really on your left-hand side, you'll see it's a very high-level snapshot of what has happened in a single year, kind of a bit more than a single, from the middle end of 2018 to the end of the 2020. What happened here in Australia at the national level and the state levels, and also as a result of those, we have kind of developed a national strategy and a roadmap towards hydrogen, towards carbon emission at national level and also state levels. And also on your right hand side, what you are seeing here, so far each one of the states or territories has developed its own either policies or strategies or roadmaps towards a natural or kind of carbon neutral or net zero economy. And which is, I think, I'm very happy that we are actually achieving this much within relatively short period of time, given like how much those political plays can happen. And one thing I wanted to actually mention too is actually here in ACT, they have actually achieved 100% renewable electricity as of end of 2020. And so that's kind of just give you an indication of how seriously Australian here in our homeland, Australia is actually prepared to deal with climate change and to actually look into the potential solutions. And to me, hydrogen, and also I think to a lot of people, is a solution to the climate change as one of the many. And in this case, I will be focusing on the hydrogen, and rather than talking about others. So hydrogen, and probably we'll need to still again kind of start with the why and what. And what is hydrogen? So it's actually a an element that is a not abundant element in the universe. And if you can remember those like the periodic table we used to actually read in the high school chemistry classes, and that's the U shape of it, hydrogen actually sitting on the top left corner of it. And yeah, you are right. And it's actually a single proton orbited by an electron. And that's actually how simple it is as a hydrogen element. And two hydrogen element will form a well, again, the most simplest molecule on Earth, it's the hydrogen gas. And yeah, and also it covers basically like more than 60% of our human bodies as an element, and also it's actually contained in a lot of the fuels that we're using currently. And also there's a lot of like unique features of hydrogen that caused a bit of a confusion. For example, people think, well, that's not exist because it's colorless, it's tasteless, it's odorless, and it's actually cannot be found in natural reserve. And therefore, people tend to not to see it so often. And however, as I said, it's actually the most abundant element on Earth, and just in a different ways of presence. And also, hydrogen is very reactive, and that's also part of the reason why we don't really normally see it in the natural reserve. And this is a bit of like reactive kind of levels of different elements, and you can see hydrogen is actually sitting in a very kind of high portion of those reactive elements, and potassium sitting on the top. And that's the one, if you can remember again back in the high school classes, we throw a piece of potassium in a beaker of water, and it will start kind of dissolving and kind of smoking, and then kind of flame. And that's how reactive potassium is, and hydrogen is not too far away from that. And that's very important for you to remember, because this is actually related to some of the future sections I'm going to cover. And now it's a production, how hydrogen is produced. And the main production pathways are basically through reforming, gasification, or electrolysis processes. And for you, I know you guys probably would like enjoy more a bit of detail, so I can specifically put in those. And so that's the kind of demonstration of how the three main processes for hydrogen production through the gas, well, kind of methane, steam reforming, and the gasification, and the electrolysis process. So where for the steam reforming process, the methane, which is kind of a main component of natural gas, is passed through a very hot steam and in contacting with normally a nickel as catalyst, and then it will be turned into hydrogen with a mix of other gases. And through a bit of separation, you will produce pure hydrogen for your usage. Very similarly, here in the gasification process, where you fit into your feedstock, whatever you want to use it, can be coal, can be biomass, can be anything that contains hydrogen, through again a very hot reactor in a very controlled process. Normally we refer to it as a controlled combustion, where you have a very limited oxygen or even no oxygen, close to no oxygen, to actually burn it and release the hydrogen and also carbon monoxide. People refer to it as syngas. And then the third one is the hydrolysis process, where you use the electricity, the voltage, to drive the reaction where you split the water, which contains 2 molecules of hydrogen and 1 molecule of oxygen, and to produce the proton and oxygen. When 2 protons meet each other, they will actually form the hydrogen here and in one chamber and release, and then we can harvest and use it. So, and then I'll quickly cover a bit of like a fundamental about hydrogen in terms of hydrogen rainbow, because it's very commonly referred and causing a lot of confusions. Essentially, again, hydrogen is colorless, and it doesn't contain it's no color even when it's burning. And the reason why people giving it a color, it's mainly to trying to separate the source of its production. For example, green hydrogen normally refers to hydrogen produced from renewable sources, for example, from solar, wind power, through an electrolysis process. And gray hydrogen, that refers to a hydrogen produced through, as I'm showing here, the steam reforming process, where I explained earlier. And then the blue hydrogen is actually the same process, steam reforming, but with a carbon capturing system. That means the CO2 are released as a byproduct of this process is captured, so the hydrogen can be released. And so as to the black, which is coming from the coal gasification, brown, which is like oil cracking kind of sources, and there are also other colors like gold, pink, and a lot of like I don't know how soon we'll be running out of the colors, but essentially that's the source of hydrogen, and we are primarily in this case talking about the green hydrogen, which is from the renewable sources. So, and its application currently, hydrogen is mainly used as a industry like a chemical feedstock for a lot of industry, for example, like oil refinery industry, like a fertilizer industries, and also kind of other chemical processes. For example, the oil refinery, because of its characteristics, depending on where you produce it, there is like a more heavy oil, a light oil, sweet and sour oils, and depending on the sour content of it. So for the industry or the process to produce a kind of a consistent quality of the fuel, for example, petrol or diesel, they need to actually purify it or refine it, and by removing the sulfur content of it, and that's where hydrogen has its play. And so as to ammonia, where, in the industrial scale through the Haber-Bosch processes, people are kind of putting nitrogen with hydrogen through a magic process. They will be turned into ammonia, which is a main component of fertilizer that is used to feed or to grow the plant that feed the whole global population. And also for the methanol production, where it's referred as to a reversed water gas shift kind of process, where carbon monoxide and hydrogen were kind of reacted in a very high steam environment to turn into methanol, which is actually widely used as either a solvent or base substrate for other high or complex chemicals. So essentially what I'm trying to say here in this part is actually, well, hydrogen is common, it's accessible, and more important, it's actually widely used by our industry. It's not secret, it's no scare. And then in the next chapter, I will share some kind of the common concerns or challenges that we're facing towards hydrogen, which I see as opportunities again for hydrogen. And before we kind of look into any kind of actions, and I think it's better we take a stock, by looking at our current status in terms of energy usage and also emissions associated with energy. And as I highlighted here on the left-hand side, and that's the energy mix here, or usage by sector here in Australia. As you can see here, with transportation, electricity, and manufacturing, it can actually basically account for at least 70% of the total energy consumption here in Australia. Similarly, here on your right-hand side, the associated emission from those sectors are contributing to like more than 75% of our national carbon emissions annually. And that means if we were going to do something with like climate change by reducing the carbon emission, those will be the sectors we might want to start with if we wanted to really making some serious changes. And in the meantime, and what you are seeing here is actually a chart of the percentage change in terms of emissions associated with each one of the sectors since 1990, in the past 20-30 years or so. And as you can see here, and they have been keep going, or I mean like going up, increasing in the past 30 years. And I am expecting they will be keep going or growing because they normally go hand in hand with economical growth, which is actually the basis for what kind of standards of living, because everybody wanting to have a happier, healthier, and longer life, and we want to enjoy more of our life. And I personally don't expect anything can actually be reduced in terms of the way we are doing. However, that is not conflicting with our goals in terms of reducing the carbon emission, because to me, what we can do is actually, instead of doing less, we only need to change the ways, for example, the ways we travel, the ways we heat our homes, and also the ways we making things. by using alternative or clean kind of or resources. In this case, again, sorry, it's hydrogen to me. And for example, we can use hydrogen to clean up our transportation sector, creating greener lands, and also we can use hydrogen in the, for example, steel manufacturing industry, which is actually the heaviest emission sector here in Australia and globally. And also we can actually use hydrogen to make our grid, our home greener by, for example, through the transportation sector, as you can hear. Well, currently there are trials and demonstrations of trucks that is to be powered by hydrogen through the means of a fuel cell, where it turns the hydrogen from its chemical form into electricity. And that electricity drives the truck. And based on what I've seen up to now, those hydrogen-powered trucks are as efficient as the diesel ones and as powerful as those diesel ones, but they are just greener. They emit no emission at all. All the end product out of those processes is water that come out of the other end. Similarly, here in the steelmaking process, we are very lucky to be part of partners with one of a local steelmaker. And we are looking at the feasibilities of applying hydrogen into the steelmaking process to make it greener and less polluting. Because traditionally, for us to make a steel for the steel production, which comes from iron ore that contains a lot of oxygen and other impurities. The whole kind of melting or kind of process, or kind of the process to remove those oxygen and impurities from the iron ore and to produce a pure steel at the end of the process. And traditionally, the agent the industry used to remove the oxygen is actually coal. What we refer as coking coal, where they will combine with the oxygen within the iron ore to remove it and to produce can remove it in the form of producing CO2 and then leaving the relatively pure steel as end product. However, this process, again, as I mentioned, produced heaps of CO2 as a byproduct of the steel, and we need to actually reduce the CO2 emission associated with those processes. And luckily, as I mentioned in the past, like hydrogen is a very reactive agent. That means it actually reacts anything. That's including oxygen. And also it emits very high degrees of heat when it's burned. And because of those two unique features, we are now looking into the feasibilities of replacing the coal or electricity used in the steelmaking process to actually for reducing of the carbon footprint. And also somewhere like here in Sweden, this is the piece of I believe that the first batch of green steel or net carbon steel that made by a Swedish steel manufacturing sometime last year, and that's actually demonstrated that this is actually feasible to use hydrogen to produce a green steel. And similarly here, I will go very quick because of time limitation. Here is actually a demonstration of using hydrogen-powered power generator to actually as a backup power for the grid to really compensate the gaps during the peak hour that is kind of created by big demand and the actual production capacity. And this one you are seeing here is actually at a gigawatt hour capacity, and it's essentially a big one. So with those big demand from those industries, and people would start asking, well, where will this hydrogen come from to actually meet this demand and also at a cost that is compatible and it's cheap enough? And we have a dedicated team here within Swinburne have actually done a modeling work. As you can see here, that's actually a modeling work where we are trying to identify where are the optimal regions for green hydrogen production based on natural resources in terms of solar, wind, and tide, or for example, resources in that region. And as you can see here, we are predicting by the year of 2040 in those dark green areas, that's and also part of here in Victoria, and that's the Ballarat areas, we will be able to produce hydrogen at the cost of less than $2 a kilo at a very large scale that meet all the demand. And what does it mean by this demand, like this price? And that means with well, through time, with kind of the reduction of the prices of hydrogen, it will be becoming compatible to be used in those industries. For example, by 2023, which is not too far away, we are predicting in those optimal regions, the dark blue circles you have just seen, they will be able to produce green hydrogen at the cost that is even cheaper than trucking diesels to those regions. And also to the year closer to like 2046, where the hydrogen produced in those optimal regions will be cheap enough to replace all those coal-fired kind of electricities by using the green hydrogen. So that's essentially kind of like where the demand is coming and where the actually matching supply will come, making sure there is actually balanced demand and supply for the whole sustainability of the hydrogen economy. And you probably like kind of thinking, well, yeah, well, it has been really talking about like, well, here now for like 30 minutes or so, and what does it mean? What does it relate to me in terms of the chemical sensing? And because like, well, to me, definitely by the face of it, it's kind of far away from the chemical sensing. However, I have actually done a kind of not so deep dive into the relevant kind of opportunities in relation to chemical sensing in the hydrogen economy. In a way that because when I look at those sectors like transportation, manufacturing, and all the kind of electricity kind of energy sectors, and in common, to me, they will both they will all experience one common issue that is related to the safety part of it in terms of when you're dealing with hydrogen. And again, this is because of its unique physical and chemical features of it, as it's kind of hard to detect, and that means our human sensors like will not actually work because it's colorless, odorless, and it's actually tasteless. And that means for us to be able to monitor the environment where we make sure it's safe and there's no hazardous exposed to the workers in that place, we need a system that provides a reliable monitoring and detecting and alarming solution to make sure we are kept not in the dark when dealing with hydrogen. And that's what I think that this chemical sensing technology will kick in terms of providing a potential and robust solutions towards dealing with hydrogen from the safety and operational perspectives of consideration. And now that's, again, as I was saying, like from me as a non-chemical sensing background person, and that kind of might start thinking. And I, in the next maybe 3 or 5 minutes, I would like to take this time to work together with you and also ask you to actually do a reflection on how, from your perspective and your research and your activities, will be able to have a play in the hydrogen economy. And to give you a kickstart, I cannot start with this is a bit of what I can think of from everything related to hydrogen or industry. And with those, you can actually pay attention to those highlighted in blue. That is, to me, related to chemical sensing that can be potentially have a bit of play in the hydrogen economy. And with that in mind, I am going to use the next probably 3 or 4 minutes for you to have a think about a few key questions. And I want you to do that while you actually doing it. Put yourself in the shoes of your potential industry partners or your collaborations when you're thinking about those questions. And this is the question I'm going to ask you to think through. And so I want you to be able to think it through from, for example, the concerns or the challenges or to the demand and my advantages, and also where and how my expertise or my research can have a potential implementation. And while doing this, and for you to basically reflect on a potential entry point for your research and to actually go into the hydrogen economy. And so I will randomly, I'll give you the next 3 or 5 minutes, but after that I will randomly pick one of you, maybe to share kind of your questions or kind of your answers to one of the 4 questions I put up. So yes, I said I'll give you the next 2 or 3 minutes to have a think about it, and I will leave it here, and then I'll come back in 2 minutes or 3 to actually share some of your. I hope I can get someone to share some of your answers. I will leave it here.
So we'll see how if anyone responds. They can leave the responses in the Q&A. That's probably the easiest format for that, because I don't think we can really pick out attendees. I did have a couple of questions for you, Jason. I was wondering, in terms of the safety aspect of hydrogen, are you finding when you talk to people in industry that that's something that they are knowledgeable of or concerned about? Is it something they just take as part of the territory, or is it something that you don't find a lot of people really appreciate?
Yeah, it's really depending on who you're talking with in relation to their levels of understanding, and that's why we are we have designed this program to really lift or increase the levels of literacy towards hydrogen, depending on the different kind of backgrounds. And but in common, I think I try not to be generalized, but essentially kind of a lot of time when I went into the conversation, I realized that people tend to know not enough towards hydrogen. And that's kind of really kind of concern to me, because it's kind of on one hand from people who from this hydrogen industry, or even from industry, don't know enough with my kind of levels of kind of judgment, and that's why I think it's very important for people to have a good understanding of hydrogen in terms of chemical, physical, and kind of all the character and the perspectives of it, and to really have a comprehensive understanding of hydrogen before you actually deal with it, and before you actually start exploring the opportunities of it. And I will probably leave it over here, Chris, and because I do have a few slides and that I'll need to run through before we can answer more questions. So, and well, I have actually got Associate Professor Manez Shafei to actually address all those questions I just posted, and she has kindly provided a kind of response based on her experience, and I will quickly show it to you because I do aware of the time. And in the next 3 or 4 minutes. So essentially, as Manez has identified, well, the common concerns within the hydrogen industry that is related to kind of sensing is actually, it's again, physical and chemical properties of hydrogen. That is it's highly flammable, it's very explosive, and it's actually hard to detect. And because of that, there's a huge demand of hydrogen sensor for the same reason, to be able to really detect and monitor and really create a kind of a system where not system, but also like an environment for the worker to be safely working in there. And because of that, there is a lot of common challenges, for example, in relation to the recovery and response time, the sensitivities of which, Chris, you have mentioned in the earlier morning session, and that's a kind of really common, again, regardless of which gas or kind of a chemical you're detecting. And in this case, it's actually hydrogen. So we need to be more specific towards also like a common issues, but trying to connect it to the hydrogen or the areas we are trying to implement it. And that's actually kind of, as I said, well, commonly aligned kind of concerns or shared concerns that will drive to the next levels of thinking in terms of how do I leverage on my advantage or my expertise by assessing what do I have now and what can I potentially kind of collaborate based on your environment or the teams. And here again, Manaz has shared that, well, she has been doing researches in the sensing related areas for decades, and she has built up those edges in a way towards the hydrogen sensor development. And she was actually involved in from time to time in those related activities towards hydrogen sensor. So that's kind of what she has identified as her advantage of, well, for her to get into the hydrogen sensing areas. And with all those, she has went up and talked to her industry partners and shared all her kind of observed concerns from her perspective, which was convinced or also confirmed by the industry partners as a common and shared concerns. And as a result of that, you basically aligned the kind of concerns with your industry and your research capacities, and they in the end put up a collaborative research project looking at a hydrogen production trial or pilot project that is aiming for a on-site production for exporting hydrogen to overseas countries. And Manaz's part is actually involved in the actual detection of hydrogen in the whole system, and that's kind of where her expertise comes in. And yeah, and that's kind of a bit of a reflection of it. And I think the take-home message I hope for you will be essentially the things related to hydrogen is actually it will be a big topic, and I do hope someone of you will be seriously considering doing researches on hydrogen and all related, and start planning on those conversations with your industry partners, and also design in a way that you are actually creating a shared and a common concern or gap. And also last but not least, it's actually impact. I think our researchers should be focusing on impact generation on top of the outcomes as a means of publications, for example. And yeah, and happy to take any questions if we do have time. And this is basically, well, you will see like that's the hydrogen car behind us, and that's actually a demonstration kind of toolkit we put up in the welcome week here at Swinburne about like months ago. And if you do have other questions and you can't answer, or I can't answer today due to time limitation, you're welcome to reach out us either by WH2 contact or my personal contact. I'll leave there, and happy to take any questions from now.
Cool, thank you, Jason. We are running just slightly behind time, so I might leave the questions for another time. I can take the questions that are in the Q&A and sure, forward them to you offline, and maybe we can provide some answers to people if they have anything they would like to ask. But thank you very much. That was very interesting.